Ethan Cole was only 24 when he stepped into the city's homicide unit, but his sharp instincts quickly put him face to face with a killer unlike any other. Marcus Hale, once a respected professor, had transformed into a predator obsessed with destroying bright futures. Their paths collided in a chilling game of control and survival, one young detective determined to prove himself, and one cunning murderer determined to break him. This is the story of how potential met pure evil, and how deadly the cost became. Ethan Cole's career had always been defined by speed. He graduated from the academy earlier than most, solved complex cases faster than anyone expected, and became the youngest detective in the city's homicide unit at just 24. To outsiders, he looked like a rising star destined for greatness. But Ethan knew what came with that label: unrelenting pressure, heavy expectations, and eyes watching for the first mistake. The day he received his first homicide case, he felt that pressure like a storm pressing down on his shoulders. It wasn't just another file on his desk. It was the kind of case that could either make or break him. The victim's name was Lily Carter, a college student with her whole life ahead of her. She was smart, ambitious, and admired by classmates who believed she would go far in life. Her disappearance had shaken the city, but it was the discovery of her body in an abandoned factory that made the story explode across headlines. Ethan stood in the middle of the factory floor, staring at the carefully arranged scene. Lily's body wasn't left in a state of chaos. Instead, she had been positioned as if someone had placed her there deliberately, with chilling precision. It wasn't rage or impulse that had ended her life. It was calculation. That thought made Ethan's blood run cold. He examined every detail with painstaking care. The cracked windows, the dust on the floor, the way the air smelled of rust and mold. There were no signs of forced entry, no scattered belongings, no obvious weapon left behind. Whoever had done this was careful and deliberate. Ethan noticed that Lily's shoes were missing, a detail that didn't match robbery or a random attack. It was something symbolic, a signature perhaps. Detectives twice his age studied the scene alongside him, but while they traded theories, Ethan stayed silent, letting his instincts do the work. His gut told him this was not the killer's first time. Back at the station, Ethan pored over the evidence file until his eyes blurred. Photographs of Lily's life filled the pages. Her smiling with friends, her dedication to studies, her volunteer work at a local shelter. She wasn't just a victim. She was someone with dreams, someone whose potential had been stolen. That thought gnawed at Ethan more than anything else. He began tracing her last known movements, replaying her final hours in his mind. She had left the library late at night and never made it home. The path she walked was quiet, lined with dim streetlights and old warehouses. Somewhere along that walk, someone had been waiting. The more Ethan studied the case, the more he realized this wasn't about chance. It was about control. The killer had chosen Lily, selected the factory, and executed the plan with discipline. The absence of panic or mistakes suggested confidence, even arrogance. It was as if the killer wanted the police to see his work, to recognize the effort put into every detail. Ethan's chest tightened at the realization. He wasn't just chasing a criminal. He was stepping into a game designed by someone who believed he was smarter than everyone else. And for the first time, Ethan began to wonder if he had been chosen too. The discovery of Lily Carter's body should have been the end of a single tragedy, but Ethan quickly realized it was only the beginning of something far more sinister. As he combed through old records and unsolved cases, he found chilling parallels. 6 months earlier, a young medical student had vanished in a neighboring town. Her body was never recovered, but her disappearance mirrored Lily's, last seen leaving a library late at night with no witnesses, no forced entry, and no trace of struggle. Another file revealed a law student who had disappeared 3 months ago, this time after leaving a study group. She too was never found. What tied them together was not just the circumstances, but who they were. Bright, ambitious women on paths toward successful futures. The realization settled over Ethan like a weight. Someone was deliberately targeting women with potential, women whose lives promised impact. The press quickly caught wind of the possibility of a serial killer, dubbing him the Collector. The name came from the eerie way victims were taken, as if each life was carefully selected and stolen to fill a twisted collection. Every headline screamed of fear and speculation, and the city bristled with unease. Parents kept their daughters close, universities increased campus security, and the police department felt the mounting pressure of a community demanding answers. For Ethan, it wasn't just about solving a case anymore. It was about proving that he deserved the badge pinned to his chest, proving that being the youngest detective in homicide wasn't a mistake. But as much as he pushed himself, the doubt of older detectives echoed in his mind. They saw his ambition as arrogance, his determination as recklessness. Ethan buried himself in Lily's world, searching for patterns and connections. He studied her social media, her circle of friends, her class schedules, and every place she had visited in the weeks before her death. The more he looked, the clearer it became that she wasn't chosen randomly. Someone had been watching her, studying her routines and waiting for the perfect moment. That thought haunted him, especially when he discovered that the abandoned factory where her body was found had no obvious link to her life. Why that building? Why that place? It seemed intentional, almost staged, as though the killer wanted to send a message. A break came when Ethan pulled surveillance footage from a gas station near the factory. In the grainy black and white video, a figure stood at the edge of the screen, watching the factory days before Lily's body was discovered. The figure never moved closer, never revealed his face, but his stillness was unnerving. He stood with the posture of someone in control, someone unafraid of being caught. Ethan replayed the footage over and over, convinced this was no random passerby. This was their suspect, surveying the stage before his crime. The evidence was thin, and the case was fragile, but Ethan's instincts screamed that they were up against someone meticulous and calculating. He wasn't just chasing a murderer. He was chasing a predator who believed he was smarter than the system. And worse, the killer wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was leaving just enough of himself behind to be seen, almost daring Ethan to follow. That challenge burned in Ethan's mind, and he knew the game was only beginning. Ethan's search for answers led him down paths that seemed at first to be dead ends. Then a name kept resurfacing in his notes, a man who had once stood at the center of academic praise and later fell into disgrace. Dr. Marcus Hale, a former psychology professor, had made his career studying human behavior, particularly control and manipulation. Years earlier, Hale had been forced out of academia after rumors of inappropriate relationships with students tarnished his reputation. Though no charges had stuck, the scandal left him bitter and withdrawn from public life. As Ethan read about Hale, something unsettled him. The man's obsession with power over others matched perfectly with the controlled, staged crime scenes. Digging deeper, Ethan discovered that Lily Carter had attended one of Hale's guest lectures only a few months before her death. It might have been coincidence, but then Ethan cross-referenced records and realized that the other missing women had also crossed paths with Hale in some capacity. One had enrolled in his class years earlier, while another had volunteered at an event where Hale was a speaker. The connections weren't obvious at first glance, but the web was there, faint and sinister, stretching between the professor and each victim. Ethan couldn't ignore it. What made Hale stand out even more was his online presence. Though no longer teaching, he wrote anonymous essays on obscure forums about society's failure to recognize true potential and the need for intervention when gifted lives are wasted. His words were chilling in their precision, often describing young people who strived for greatness yet, in his view, lacked the strength to endure real challenges. It was as though Hale believed he had the right to test them, to determine who deserved to continue and who did not. Ethan read line after line, his stomach turning with each passage. They weren't abstract ideas. They were manifestos that eerily reflected the lives of the victims. Despite the disturbing evidence, Ethan had little to present in court. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing tangible tying Hale to the murders. Every step forward seemed to slide into uncertainty. Hale was educated, intelligent, and deeply aware of how investigators operated. He had studied not just human psychology, but also criminology, and Ethan began to see him as a man playing chess with invisible pieces, always 3 moves ahead. The more Ethan thought about Hale, the more he realized this wasn't just about killing. It was about building a narrative, one where the killer positioned himself as both judge and executioner. He saw Lily and the others not as individuals, but as symbols of futures he believed should be cut short. Each murder wasn't random violence. It was a statement crafted with cold precision. Ethan felt the chill of recognition. This wasn't just a murderer. This was someone shaping a story in which Ethan himself might become a character. The weight of suspicion pressed heavily, but Ethan knew he had to tread carefully. Hale had left no room for mistakes, and any reckless move could destroy the fragile threads connecting him to the crimes. Yet the deeper Ethan looked into Hale's writings and history, the more certain he became that he was staring into the mind of a predator who not only hunted victims, but also thrived on outsmarting those who pursued him. The thought was both terrifying and electrifying. For the first time, Ethan realized this case wasn't about finding evidence alone. It was about stepping inside the mind of a man who believed he was untouchable and proving him wrong. The investigation took a darker turn when news broke of another disappearance, this time unfolding in broad daylight. Claire Turner, a promising law student, had been walking home from campus when she vanished without a trace. Unlike the earlier cases, where the victims had disappeared under the cover of night, this abduction was bold, brazen, and deliberately public. For Ethan, the shift in pattern confirmed what he feared most. The killer was growing confident, testing limits, and taunting the investigators who struggled to keep up. The city's panic deepened, and pressure from the public turned suffocating. Ethan knew this was no longer just a hunt. It was a race against time. Claire's disappearance carried a personal sting. She was close to Ethan's age, with the same drive and ambition that defined Lily Carter and the others. Reading her case file, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the killer had escalated for a reason. The abduction wasn't just about adding another victim. It was about sending a message, a declaration that he could strike whenever and wherever he wanted. That thought kept Ethan awake at night, his mind replaying the possibilities of where Claire might be and what horrors she could be enduring. He turned his focus toward Dr. Marcus Hale, the suspect whose shadow lingered over every thread of the case. Tracking Hale's recent activity, Ethan uncovered records of a remote cabin Hale had rented outside the city. The location was isolated, surrounded by dense woods, far from neighbors or prying eyes. To Ethan, it fit the profile perfectly, a secluded stage where Hale could continue his twisted experiments without interruption. With a small team, Ethan drove to the cabin, his heart pounding with the hope of finding Claire alive. The cabin itself was eerie in its stillness. Dust covered the furniture, and the windows were shuttered against the daylight. Every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified as the investigators searched room by room. In the corner of the main room, a notebook lay open on a wooden table. Its pages were filled with scrawled phrases that chilled Ethan to the bone. Potential wasted, futures redirected. The hunter must prove his worth. On the last page, written in bold strokes, were the words, "The youngest hunter always believes he's ready. But sometimes the prey is waiting." Ethan froze as he read the lines. This wasn't just a diary entry. It was a direct taunt aimed at him. The killer knew who was chasing him, and he was turning the investigation into a personal game. Ethan felt the weight of every eye in the room as he tried to mask his unease, but inside, the message rattled him. Hale wasn't only targeting the victims anymore. He was targeting the detective who stood against him. The search of the cabin yielded no sign of Claire. No clothing, no personal items, no physical evidence beyond the notebook. It was a crushing disappointment, yet Ethan refused to let despair take root. He realized that the killer was deliberately staying ahead, leading him in circles, forcing him to play along. As he left the cabin and looked out at the endless stretch of forest, Ethan knew two things with absolute certainty. Claire's time was running out, and Hale was no longer just hunting potential in his victims. He was hunting Ethan as well. 2 weeks after the discovery of the cabin, the search for Claire Turner ended in heartbreak. Her body was found in a wooded clearing not far from the remote site. Unlike Lily, she hadn't been arranged in a ritualistic way. Instead, she had been left among the trees, as if discarded, the killer's confidence evident in his carelessness. The crime scene investigators moved carefully, documenting every detail, but Ethan felt a crushing sense of failure. He had been so close, and yet he had arrived too late. Still, as painful as the discovery was, there was finally a breakthrough. Beneath Claire's fingernails, forensic specialists recovered a fragment of skin tissue. It was small, nearly overlooked, but it was enough to provide a DNA profile. When the results returned, Ethan's suspicions were confirmed. The match was Dr. Marcus Hale. The evidence transformed the investigation. For months, Hale had been a shadow, a figure of suspicion without tangible proof, but now his identity was undeniable. Detectives traced his movements, uncovering that he had been living under a false name in a quiet, suburban neighborhood. It was a place no one would have thought to look, a small, ordinary house on a street where children played and neighbors waved at each other. Hale had been hiding in plain sight, blending in with the world while carrying out his atrocities. The operation to bring him in was swift but tense. Ethan stood with the arrest team, his pulse racing as they surrounded the house. He could see the curtains drawn tightly, a thin sliver of light escaping from the edges. For a moment, he imagined Hale waiting inside, smirking, ready to play one final move in the game. When the team entered, Hale offered no resistance. He simply raised his hands, his expression calm, almost amused. To Ethan, that smirk was worse than a struggle. It was the face of a man who believed he had already won, even in chains. Back at the station, journals taken from Hale's home painted a disturbing picture. Page after page detailed his obsession with high potential and his philosophy that not everyone deserved to reach greatness. He wrote of his victims as if they were subjects in an experiment, their deaths described as necessary corrections. Most disturbing of all were the passages about Ethan himself. Hale had tracked his career, noted his age, his rapid rise, and his reputation as a prodigy within the force. In the journals, Ethan was described not as an opponent, but as the final test. To Hale, the young detective represented the very idea he despised, unproven potential that threatened to grow into something formidable. Though hailed as a hero by the department and praised by the media for solving the case, Ethan felt no triumph. The applause of the public couldn't erase the images of Lily, Claire, and the others whose futures had been stolen. The weight of Hale's words lingered in his mind, the taunt of a predator who had turned murder into a performance. Ethan realized that while the case was closed, the scars it left behind would not fade quickly. He had faced his first true test as a detective, one that forced him to look into the darkest corners of human nature. And as he stood in the quiet of his office after the chaos had settled, he understood that this would not be the last time he faced a challenge like this. The shadows of the city were vast, and for a young detective with high potential, deadly challenges were only just beginning.